Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. This is episode 5 on our series on the Knights Templar. In just a few decades, the Knights Templar experienced a rise that was nothing short of extraordinary, comparable to watching a small enterprise transform into a global power. In the Middle Ages, nothing quite like this had ever occurred before. A modest group of warrior monks founded in Jerusalem around the year 1119 to protect pilgrims on their journeys suddenly became so influential that kings entrusted them with treasuries and popes granted them extraordinary privileges. Yet this remarkable rise did not happen in isolation. It was shaped by a series of crises, defeats, and shifting alliances in the Holy Land. These intense pressures forged the Templars into a force of unmatched military discipline, logistical expertise, and financial insight. While the Templars steadily expanded their network across Western Europe, conditions in the East were deteriorating. The First Crusade had established four fragile Christian states: Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa. They were scattered along exposed borders and often divided by internal disputes. Then, in 1144, disaster struck. The county of Edessa, the most vulnerable, fell swiftly under the siege by the Muslim leader Zengi. Though not responsible for Edessa's defense, the Templars felt the ripple effects of its loss. Eyewitness accounts described grim massacres and the shocking collapse of what had seemed a stable Christian outpost only a generation earlier. The fall sent shockwaves from Antioch to Rome, exposing how precarious the Christian hold had become and how poorly coordinated the Latin powers were. Earlier setbacks, such as failed expeditions at Damascus in 1129 and Montferrand in 1137, had shown few cracks in territorial stability and trouble. But this was a wake-up call that raised the alarm, grief, and a desperate call for action. In Rome, Pope Eugene III understood that words alone would not be sufficient. In December 1145, he issued the papal bull Quantum Predecessores, a rallying cry echoing the spirit of the First Crusade, offering full forgiveness of sins to anyone who took up the cross. To spread the message, the Church turned to its most persuasive voice. We have heard of this character before, Bernard of Clairvaux, the renowned abbot. On March 31st, 1146, on top of a hillside in Vézelay, Burgundy, Bernard preached to a massive crowd, including King Louis VII of France and his queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Accounts describe an atmosphere so fervent that they ran out of cloth crosses, prompting Bernard to tear strips from his own robe. The enthusiasm spread rapidly like fire, reaching north and east. By the late 1146, Conrad III of Germany had pledged his support. With two powerful kings leading the charge, the Second Crusade appeared destined for triumph. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Funding such a massive operation posed massive logistical challenges. Armies required ships, horses, food, weapons, and wages for thousands over long months. Royal coffers were stretched thin, and every supply line carried risks. This is where innovative organizations stepped in, those capable of securing, transporting money, and making it available precisely where needed. By the mid-1140s, the Knights Templar had mastered this art. In 1147, Louis VII of France placed his entire royal treasury in their hands, a bold display of trust. Their network of fortified houses and commanderies from Paris and London to Mediterranean ports and Levantine cities created a chain of secure vaults. Using internal documents and orders, Templar officials could accept deposits in one location and authorize withdrawals in another. Their letters of credit, a precursor to modern banking, revolutionized the movement of funds across continents, enabling nobles and pilgrims to travel without carrying coins, while kings shifted resources over vast distances. It was an ingenious early system that minimized risks and maximized efficiency. The Templars applied the same strict principles from their monastic rule, with meticulous record keeping, accountability, and shared purpose, all applied impeccably to finance and supply this large endeavor. The Templars were not merely bankers, they were vital providers in the field. As expert guides and escorts in the East, they excelled at scouting routes, at securing vulnerable paths. When Louis VII's army crossed Anatolia, the journey became a nightmare. Conrad III of Germany and his forces were crushed near Dorylaeum in October 1147 by swift-mounted archers, plagued by supply shortages and disorganization. Louis's French troops moved alone, only to walk into a deadly ambush in the rugged hills near Mount Cadmus in January 1148. Chaos followed. Baggage tumbled off cliffs, units scattered, and Turkish forces struck relentlessly. It was the Templars led by Everard de Bar, soon to become their grandmaster, who saved the day. They enforced discipline, regrouped the royal guard, and guided survivors out of danger. Odo of the Wheel, the king's chaplain and eyewitness, later credited them with preventing total annihilation, praising their calm expertise in the middle of chaos. The episode earned the Templars a spot in the history books for their impeccable organization. Yet, even their heroism could not save a flawed plan. The kings failed to coordinate, and their war councils were torn by conflicting agendas. In the summer of 1148, at a meeting in Acre, they chose their target, Damascus. Ironically, this city had at times allied against Zengi and his son, Nur al-Din, making it a poor choice that alienated potential Muslim partners and alerted the enemy. The siege began in late July, but collapsed in humiliation after only 4 days. Poor scouting, strong defenses, and rushed repositioning sealed the fate. Morale collapsed, alliances shattered, and the crusade ended in bitter finger-pointing. For Louis VII, the consequences were severe, both personally and politically. He returned home in 1149 impoverished and humble, his marriage to Eleanor strained by the ordeal. By 1152, the union was dissolved, and Eleanor's remarriage to Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England. This reshaped Europe's balance for power. The Crusades' repercussions extended far beyond the battlefield. Yet, for the Templars, this failure marked a turning point toward greater success. Kings and nobles witnessed their reliability under fire and grew increasingly dependent on their financial systems. In 1148, when Louis desperately needed funds, the Templars quickly delivered gold from a nearby stronghold, showing they could move resources across dangerous lands like no one else. Papal privileges gave them direct ties to the Pope, exemptions from local church control, and full authority over donations. Combined with their strong reputation for honesty and efficiency, this made them ideal candidates as guardians of wealth. Grateful rulers rewarded them generously. Louis granted lands in France, including the village of Savigny, which evolved into a major commandery, the commandery of Savigny-le-Temple, a lasting mark on the map. This was one thread in a growing web. In Paris, their temple quarter became a fortified center. In London, the new temple overlooked the Thames, and at La Rochelle, they developed a bustling port for fleets and trade. Each new site generated revenues from rents, farms, mills, and workshops, all overseen by disciplined brothers skilled in accounting. By the 1170s and 1180s, the Templars had grown into a transcontinental powerhouse, running standardized operations using official seals for authenticity and deploying versatile officers who could audit finances in Europe one month and manage supplies in the Levant the next. In the East, the Templars held firm even under persistent threats. They garrisoned the frontiers, escorted caravans, and served as the Latin state's rapid response force. With only a few hundred knights at any time, bolstered by sergeants, local cavalry, and support staff, they leveraged their small numbers with constant readiness. Their castles and outposts secured key passes and roads, forming the backbone of the region's defenses. The Templars' rule, first outlined at the Council of Troyes and refined over time, blended monastic austerity, vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, simple living with practical wartime adjustments, no fasting before battles, well-fed horses, and excused prayers for those on duty ensured peak performance. They fused spiritual devotion with soldierly efficiency, attracting donors and earning rulers' trust. More importantly, their financial role stayed within Christian guidelines, avoiding direct usury. They presented it as a protective stewardship, safeguarding funds and facilitating transfers, and advancing, of course, the holy cause. Fees simply covered expenses, and with communal property and modest living, every resource went back into defending the faith. Concrete outcomes like new commanderies in the west and stronger fortifications in the east sustained this virtuous cycle. The Second Crusade in the years 1147 and 1149 was an unmitigated military catastrophe that cost Christendom 50,000 lives, two bankrupt kingdoms, and not 1 inch of ground. Launched initially to recover Edessa from Zengi's son Nur al-Din, it ended in universal disgrace. For example, Conrad III's 20,000 men German host was virtually wiped out, almost 90% of his losses at Dorilaum by the Seljuk Turks. Louis VII's French army was shredded in the passes of Mount Cadmus. The Crusades' only planned offensive, the siege of Damascus, an ally only months earlier, lasted 4 days before the Crusaders fled in panic, leaving their ladders burning. The city promptly swore allegiance to Nur al-Din, forging the Muslim unity that would birth Saladin's empire later. Well, kings limped home broken. Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage lay in ruins, and the papacy credit sank so low that future crusades begged for volunteers. Well, two men who marched with the hosts recorded the verdict for posterity. If you remember, I mentioned once William of Tyre, the age's great historian. He wrote, "This expedition, undertaken with such labor and at such vast expenses, achieved nothing worthy of memory, save the increase of sorrow and the diminution of the Christian name." Another author during those times, Odo de Wil, mentioned earlier, Louis VII's own chaplain and eyewitness, was even blunter, and he wrote, "We gained nothing but shame. The infidels triumphed, and our sins found us out." Yet, the Second Crusade marked a turning point for the Knights Templar. They proved themselves as experts in managing resources, leading under pressure, and delivering when others faltered. The master, the one who became master later, Everard de Bar, celebrated for his leadership in Anatolia, rose to become Grand Master before retiring to a life of prayer, a reminder of the order's spiritual roots. Some, of course, accused the Templars of greed, but their wealth simply fueled the only centralized system that could keep fractured Christendom armed and solvent. The Second Crusade's chaos did not weaken them, it proved their worth. While kings staggered, the order planted commanderies across Burgundy and Ile-de-France, fortified Marseille and La Rochelle, stocked granaries, vineyards, and mills, and locked arms with the papacy. In the east, they remained the one permanent disciplined army under the Red Cross. Well, in the end, none of it was fate. A pope's privilege, uh, Bernard de Clairvaux sermons, and a king's trust, and Everard's cool head in crisis ignited the spark. It was one event after the other that fueled and prompted the organization of the Templars to succeed. Gifts turned into estates, rents into galleys, galleys into strongholds, and strongholds into powerful influence. In under 3 years, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon became Europe's bankers, quartermasters, and the last line of defense. That is why the Crusade's humiliation marks the Templars' true beginning, because it forged their monk soldier identity and made them almost indispensable. And from 1149 onward, any king that would be short of funds, coins, grain, or walls, they knew exactly where to turn next, and that was to knock to the nearest Knights Templar or temple door. Well, this marks the end of our episode 5, and thank you very much for following up this far if you're following this series, and I will see you next time. Bye.